On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. A triumph for the Soviet Union, a hero's journey that changed history. The world watched as he orbited Earth and returned safely, smiling for cameras, waving to crowds. The space race had its first winner, but in a small town in Italy, two brothers had been listening to Soviet space transmissions for years. They had recordings, voices from orbit, distress calls, final words from cosmonauts whose names never appeared in history books. People who went up before Gagarin. People who didn't come back. The Soviet Union denied it all, called it Western propaganda, said Gagarin was first, always first. But what if that's not the full story?
Achille and Giovanni Judica-Cordiglia were amateur radio enthusiasts in Turin, Italy. They built a listening station in an abandoned German bunker, equipped it with surplus military receivers, and aimed their antennas east, toward the Soviet Union. They weren't spies, just teenagers obsessed with space, tracking launches, recording transmissions, listening to the signals that governments tried to keep secret. Achille described the first time they intercepted something they weren't supposed to hear. A woman's voice, speaking Russian, breathing hard, her words clipped, urgent. "I can see a flame. I can see a flame. I can see a flame." Then 32, 32. The signal degraded, crackling, breaking up. Her last words were about heat, burning, the capsule temperature rising, then silence. The brothers recorded it, documented the frequency, tried to identify the transmission source. They estimated it came from a spacecraft in distress, its orbit decaying, plunging back toward Earth too fast, too steep. No official Soviet announcement followed, no mention of a launch, no acknowledgement of a mission, just silence. According to a former Soviet aerospace engineer who spoke anonymously to a Western journalist decades later, there were missions before Gagarin, test flights, orbital attempts, some manned, some not. He said we were racing the Americans. Every failure set us back. Every death had to be hidden. He described a culture of secrecy so absolute that even engineers working on different aspects of the same program didn't know the full picture. Compartmentalization, need-to-know protocols. He said if someone died in a test, they were erased, not just from records, from memory. Their families were told they died in aircraft accidents or training exercises. He mentioned one cosmonaut specifically, Vladimir Ilyushin, son of a famous aircraft designer, a pilot, an engineer, someone with the skills and connections to be selected for early missions. Ilyushin vanished from public view for over a year. When he reappeared, he was different, injured, older somehow. He never spoke about where he'd been. Rumors circulated that he'd flown before Gagarin, that something went wrong, that he'd been recovered but couldn't be acknowledged because the mission was classified, the failure too embarrassing. He knew, the engineer said. You could see it in his face. He'd been up there. But officially, Ilyushin was never a cosmonaut. A technician who worked at Baikonur Cosmodrome, the Soviet launch site, told a similar story to a researcher compiling oral histories after the USSR collapsed. He remembered preparations for launches that weren't announced. Capsules rolled out in the middle of the night. Personnel sworn to secrecy. Missions that, according to official records, never happened. We'd hear the countdown, watch the launch, then wait for confirmation that the cosmonaut had reached orbit. Sometimes confirmation came. Sometimes it didn't. When it didn't, we'd clean the site and move on. No investigation, no debrief, just orders to forget.
He described finding debris once, scorched metal fragments in the recovery zone, pieces of a capsule that had burned on reentry. There was fabric, torn and burned, part of a pressure suit. Inside the fabric, bone fragments. We were told it was a dummy, but dummies don't have bones. The Soviet space program's official record has gaps. Launch manifests showing numbered missions with missing entries. Cosmonaut rosters with names that disappear from subsequent documents. Training photographs showing individuals who never flew. Officially. For those who remember when the Pentagon Papers revealed what the government said versus what was true, these gaps are familiar. After the Soviet Union collapsed, some archives opened. Researchers expected transparency, full disclosure of Cold War secrets. What they found was selective revelation. Some files declassified, others remaining sealed. Documents with pages removed. Entire missions referenced in correspondence, but lacking operational records. One memo mentions payload recovery complications, without specifying what the payload was. Another discusses crew survival protocols for a mission that officially never carried a crew, the part they didn't put in textbooks. The Judica-Cordiglia brothers recorded multiple transmissions between the late 50s and early 60s. Not just the woman describing flames, others. A man's labored breathing, heart rate audibly increasing, then a sudden gasp, silence. Another voice, male, calm at first, reporting system failures, loss of telemetry, capsule tumbling. His tone steady, professional, even as he described catastrophic malfunction. The last thing he said? Conditions are deteriorating. I'm going to try. The signal cut. The brothers cataloged everything. Sent copies to news agencies, tried to get official responses. Western intelligence services confirmed the transmissions were authentic Soviet communications, but couldn't verify whether they came from manned missions or tests. The Soviets dismissed it all, said the recordings were faked, Western propaganda designed to undermine their achievements, but they never provided alternative explanations for the transmissions. Never identified what the brothers had actually intercepted, if not distressed cosmonauts. They just said it didn't happen. According to documents that surfaced years later, both American and Soviet intelligence tracked each other's launches obsessively. The US monitored Soviet frequencies, trajectories, recovery operations. They knew about attempts that failed, but publicly, both sides maintained the narrative. Each success was broadcast, each failure buried. An internal NASA assessment referenced probable Soviet losses during specific windows when American tracking detected launches, but no corresponding Soviet announcements. The report estimated at least 3 to 5 manned attempts prior to Gagarin that resulted in non-recovery of payload. Payload being the euphemism for cosmonaut. It's not that the records don't exist. It's that accessing them requires navigating layers of classification that persist decades after the Cold War ended. The recordings are the clearest evidence. The Judica-Cordiglia brothers archived their intercepts on magnetic tape. The audio quality is poor. Radio signals bounced across thousands of miles through ionospheric interference captured by amateur equipment, but the voices are unmistakable. Human, Russian, distressed. One recording captured on May 17, 1960, more than a year before Gagarin, contains the most disturbing transmission. A woman, her breathing rapid, panicked. Background noise suggesting mechanical systems failing, alarms, hissing air. She's speaking continuously, describing what she sees, what's happening. The heat is rising. The heat is rising. I can feel it. Her voice changes. Terror breaking through training. It's hot. It's very hot. I can see a flame. The transmission quality degrades, but you can still hear her. I'm going to die. Silence. The brothers estimated the transmission originated from an object in low Earth orbit, descending too rapidly, a reentry trajectory that would generate catastrophic heat. No Soviet mission was officially conducted that day. Photographs from the era show additional evidence. Group photos of cosmonaut candidates with individuals who never flew, training images with faces later airbrushed out of official versions. One particularly notable photograph shows a lineup of pilots in flight suits. Early research identifies everyone, names, backgrounds, service records, but later official Soviet publications show the same photograph with 3 faces blurred or cropped out. Those 3 individuals never appear in subsequent records. No graduation from training, no assignment to missions, no obituaries when they would have reached old age. They simply ceased to exist in official histories. Memorial sites tell their own story. The Kremlin wall holds remains of heroes and officials. Cosmonauts who died in acknowledged accidents are honored there, but there are unmarked graves in military cemeteries. Stones with no names, dates that align with suspected failed missions, burials conducted with military honors, but no public ceremony. A Western journalist who gained access to one such cemetery photographed several markers, simple stones, inscriptions saying only, "Hero of the Soviet Union," with years of birth and death. No names, no details. The dates span the early 60s, the height of the space race, the years when both superpowers were pushing boundaries, taking risks, losing people. History doesn't usually forget triumph, it forgets failure. And sometimes, it's instructed to forget.
The most straightforward explanation is operational security. The Soviets were racing the United States. Every failure gave the enemy propaganda ammunition. Every death suggested weakness in their technology, their training, their ideology. If cosmonauts died in test flights, acknowledging it would undermine the narrative of Soviet superiority. Better to classify the missions, erase the participants, pretend it never happened. This theory explains the gaps in records, the missing names, the denied transmissions. It's ruthless but logical. For those who remember when governments lied about body counts in Vietnam, this kind of cover-up seems entirely plausible. The United States likely knew. Intelligence agencies tracked Soviet launches, but revealing what they knew would expose their own surveillance capabilities. So both sides maintained the fiction. The Soviets denied failures. The Americans stayed silent about what they'd detected. Mutually assured discretion. But this theory assumes the cosmonauts died accidentally. Equipment failures, calculation errors, the inevitable cost of pushing technology beyond proven limits. What if some deaths weren't accidental? The second theory is darker. What if the Soviets were testing limits deliberately, subjecting cosmonauts to conditions known to be lethal, studying human tolerance, gathering data that couldn't be obtained through simulation? The space race wasn't just about prestige. It was about weapons, orbital platforms, strategic capabilities. Understanding human survival in space had military applications. Knowing what killed people in orbit informed how to protect or attack future missions. Remember the documented experiments on soldiers, prisoners, and unwitting civilians during the Cold War? The radiation studies, the chemical tests, programs that seemed impossible until declassified documents proved they happened. What if some cosmonauts were sent up knowing they wouldn't return? Not martyrs, test subjects. The woman burning on reentry. The man describing system failures while ground control recorded his biometrics. The multiple transmissions suggesting repeated attempts despite known failure modes. If this theory is correct, the cover-up becomes permanent. because admitting it means confronting something worse than failure, deliberate sacrifice. But there's a third possibility that researchers rarely discuss publicly. What if some of the lost cosmonauts are still up there? Not bodies, not capsules, people. Orbits that never decayed. Trajectories that sent them not down, but out, into higher orbits, beyond easy recovery range. The early spacecraft had limited maneuvering capability. If a rocket stage misfired, if a trajectory calculation was wrong, a cosmonaut could end up in an orbit too high to return from, too far out for rescue, floating, waiting. The Soviets would have tracked them, listened to their transmissions as long as life support lasted, days, maybe weeks, but they couldn't bring them back. Technology wasn't there yet, so they waited for silence, then classified the mission, erased the person. Somewhere above us, capsules might still orbit, tombs circling Earth at 17,000 miles per hour, carrying remains that will eventually burn up on reentry, decades or centuries from now, unacknowledged, unnamed, lost cosmonauts in every sense.
It's not about whether people died before Gagarin. It's about how many and why we're still not supposed to know. The Judica-Cordiglia brothers spent decades defending their recordings. Achille, in particular, continued researching, archiving, trying to get acknowledgement. He died never receiving official confirmation of what he'd heard. Witnesses from the Soviet program, those who spoke before passing, shared fragments of truth, but always carefully, always with the caveat that official records said otherwise. The culture of secrecy persists. Russian space authorities still classify Cold War-era documents. Files that should be historical are treated as state secrets. Researchers seeking access face bureaucratic barriers that seem disproportionate for events over 60 years old. Why? If it's just accidents, tragic but understandable losses in the early days of spaceflight, why not acknowledge them now? Why not honor those who died pushing boundaries? For those who remember when MK Ultra was conspiracy theory before becoming documented fact, the answer suggests itself. Because what happened wasn't just accidents. The recordings continued to surface. Digital archives preserve the Judica-Cordiglia tapes. New analyses confirm they're genuine Soviet transmissions. No evidence of fakery, no plausible alternative explanation for what's captured on them. Voices from orbit, people in distress, final words from cosmonauts who officially never existed. And in Russia, space program veterans continued to die without revealing what they knew. Each passing taking memories with them. Each obituary noting distinguished service without specifics. The generation that built the Soviet space program is vanishing. Soon, no one will be left who remembers what really happened in those early years. Only the gaps, the missing names, the recordings of people screaming as they burned. Gagarin was first. That's the official story. First to go up and come back. But how many went up and didn't return? The answer exists in archives we're not allowed to see, in files still marked classified, in graves without names, and in orbit, perhaps, capsules, tumbling silently through space, carrying the lost cosmonauts, the ones we're not supposed to remember, the ones who proved we could reach space by dying there. In 2021, a Russian space historian posted declassified training documents on an academic forum. The files showed cosmonaut-class rosters from the late 50s. Several names appeared, with notations, removed from program.
No explanation, no date, just removed. Researchers cross-referenced the names against official Soviet records. None of the individuals appeared in any public documents after their removal from training. No death certificates, no reassignments, no later careers. They vanished from official existence the moment they left the cosmonaut program. The post was online for 6 hours before being deleted. The historian's account suspended, the files removed from circulation. A single comment appeared before the thread disappeared. We were told they transferred to classified programs. Guess we know what that meant now. Who were they? Where did they go? And why, over 60 years later, does someone still care about keeping it secret?